Welcome to 2020 Legislative Assembly, What First-Timers Need to Know. Since its founding in 1905, Washington State PTA has been a leading voice for the health, safety, well-being, and education of children and youth. As the largest grassroots advocacy association in the state, we look to you, the members, for our policy positions. For over 40 years, Washington State PTA has held legislative assembly to gather members for debate and adoption of our long and short-term advocacy positions. We are so excited to have you join us for the 42nd Annual Washington State PTA Legislative Assembly. This year we're going virtual, so things will be different than in the past. If this is your first time attending Legislative Assembly, you're probably full of questions. But even delegates who have attended Legislative Assembly in the past need to understand the many changes due to this year's virtual format. Everything Washington State PTA does, including its advocacy program, is done with our mission and vision in mind. Our vision is to make every child's potential a reality, and we seek to accomplish this by being a powerful voice for all children, a relevant resource for families, schools, and communities, and a strong advocate for the well-being and education of every child. So how does Legislative Assembly fit into this mission? In past years, local PTAs and councils from all over the state have sent representatives, called delegates, to an in-person legislative assembly. This year, due to COVID-19 safety precautions, we will be holding legislative assembly in a virtual format. Regardless of the format, what is legislative assembly? During this event, delegates learn about new policy positions that will be considered for adoption into Washington State PTA's advocacy program. We know the needs of children may vary around our state, and Legislative Assembly allows our advocacy program to include the voices of members from all across Washington. That helps us better represent the 1.1 million students who attend schools statewide. There are three main parts of this year's virtual Legislative Assembly. Education Q&A caucus sessions, where attendees become well informed about the proposed positions through education presentations given by the submitters of the positions. There is also a short Q&A period, followed by time for caucusing. Attendees can also receive advocacy training through classes and panel discussions. Finally, during general sessions, delegates will debate and vote on proposed policy positions. During general sessions, delegates will vote on the adoption of the agenda and standing rules, proposed additions to the Washington State PTA legislative program, and will vote to determine the top 5 legislative priorities for 2020-22. Voting will occur at various times throughout the general sessions the weekend of October 24th and 25th. Washington State PTA understands that some of the concerns we seek solutions for are broad, systemic issues. Washington State PTA positions include legislative principles, resolutions, and legislative issues. Long-term legislative principles are permanent positions and recognize that sustained effort and attention will be required to get them addressed. The legislative principles consist of 5 overarching categories: budget, revenue, and funding, family and community engagement, public education policies, health and well-being of children and youth, and safe and nurturing environments for children and youth. The full list of legislative principles in each category can be found on our website. Legislative principles can be added to or amended at Legislative Assembly. Resolutions are major positions taken by the association that generally have a call for action. These policy solutions can take the form of legislative changes at the state, county, or local level, or school district level, and guide the advocacy work of Washington State PTA as well as our local PTAs and councils. Resolutions are permanent positions and can be adopted or amended at both convention and Legislative Assembly. Legislative issues are statewide positions adopted by delegates at Legislative Assembly to receive the focus of our advocacy efforts in Olympia. Legislative issues adopted in even-numbered years, such as 2020, are ranked into a top 5 and remain on the short-term platform for 2 years, mirroring the 2-year legislative cycle in Olympia. In odd-numbered years, legislative issues can be added to the short-term platform, but issues are not re-ranked and are added to the Also Supported list. Where do our positions come from? They can be submitted by PTA members, local PTAs, councils, the Washington State PTA Advocacy Committee, or the Washington State PTA Resolutions Committee. Submissions are due by June 1st. Occasionally, the Washington State PTA Board of Directors will take a board position on an emergent topic. Board positions must be adopted by members within 1 year. After a position has been submitted, it goes through multiple steps before getting to the delegates at Legislative Assembly. Legislative principles and legislative issues are reviewed by the Advocacy Committee, who vets and reviews all member submissions using a criteria checklist. The committee can also write submissions to fill any gaps that need to be addressed. The committee then forwards the positions, along with committee recommendations, to the Washington State PTA Board of Directors. The board considers each position for advancement to the Legislative Assembly based on validation of the review process and alignment to organizational strategies and mission. The board may also vote whether to make a recommendation to delegates on the adoption of a position. The board can attach a recommendation to adopt, reject, or with no recommendation for each position. Using a similar process, resolutions are reviewed by the Resolutions Committee and then the Board of Directors. Then the positions are debated and voted on by the delegates at Legislative Assembly. On the Washington State PTA website, the Legislative Assembly page is found under Events and Programs. There you will find all of the information you need about registration, voting delegates, schedule of events, voting information, and more. If you find you have questions that can't be answered on the website, please email support@wasstatepta.org to get your questions answered. Legislative Assembly is a wonderful opportunity to discover what makes PTA such an effective advocacy organization, the passion of its members. Legislative Assembly is one of those opportunities where you really get as much out of it as you put into it. Attend the Education Q&A caucus sessions, as well as the classes and panels to learn more about the work we do as PTA. And then attend the general sessions where we adopt new positions to help us advocate for every child. Many attendees comment that by going through this process, they come to recognize that PTA is much more than fundraisers. Legislative Assembly is how we truly engage in our mission of being a strong advocate for the well-being and education of every child. Come along, it's a fun ride. Please watch the videos on caucusing and amendments, as well as how general sessions will work in our virtual format to learn more. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed this year's Washington State PTA Legislative Assembly.